My guest today is David Rhode. He has a lot of experience in Procter& and Gamble and in Heinz. He's run his own organization and set up a nonprofit about baseball and softball. I think a nonprofit. It's a very dear topic to me. I have an enlarged spleen because Bruce Seaman hit me in the abdomen with his elbow in a softball game in high school. You've also written a book about nonprofits and serving in leadership position on nonprofits. I believe it's right over your shoulder. Passion isn't enough. I've read the book and I'm looking forward to our conversation on that. So when we talk about nonprofits, yeah, by the way, my daughter doesn't like the word nonprofit. She says you shouldn't start any organization with the very first thing you say is what it's not. Which I thought is an interesting thing. We certainly get value out of her college education. But people come together in the area because it's something they really care about. It's something where they may want to make a difference. I think you've got some interesting backgrounds. Sometimes in leadership positions is sort of a nice congenial atmosphere, which may not lead to the best to the best results. What are the really important things that people working in nonprofits should know about and the skills they should have?
Well, first of all, Dan, thanks for having me. I think people should understand that while passion and some level of connection and shared interest is what might bring them together, that 501c3 is a 501c3 corporation. So nonprofit organizations are businesses, and so they need to be run professionally. And a big part of that is not just the staff leadership, but the board leadership. So when I think about skills, I think it's important to be a strategic thinker. I think it's important to be a creative thinker. But we also have to recognize, especially within the nonprofit sector, that we might have come from a background where our corporation might have had lots of resources, lots of money, big teams, lots of people. And 92% of the nonprofit organizations have budgets of $1 million or less. So you can imagine there's a very small team that's running them, and they don't have that same kind of a resource mindset. There's a sense of scarcity typically. And so I think we have to make that transition if we're coming from the corporate world into the nonprofit sector to understand that there's a little bit of a different relationship with the scarce resources that we do have. From a skills perspective, I think it's important really just at the fundamental level to be a good public speaker. If you're a staff leader or a board member, you're a brand ambassador and you're going to be on the front lines telling the organization's story. And if that's something that you're not comfortable with, it's an area that you can work on professionally, get some coaching around. But I think it's important to be comfortable in front of other people, get an elevator pitch that sort of hits on the salient points for your organization, why it's making a difference in the community, and be comfortable, sharing that story because you are one of the key people that's bringing that message forward.
That's a very interesting point because you run across people in all of the parts of your life where you meet people and you're representing the organization, which people join, because it's something they really care about, not necessarily because it's the job that, a lot of my jobs joined because somebody bought the company I was already working for. So if you're serving on a board of a nonprofit, does the structure work sort of like a for-profit board or private boards, or do they have the same committee structure? Is it something that the experience can help carry over into other kinds of boards, or is it fundamentally different?
There are similarities and there are huge differences. So let's kind of cover both sides of the fence. In terms of where they're similar, there is an important responsibility related to governance and making sure that resources are being used in a responsible manner. And that's something that board members, whether in a for-profit or non-for-profit organization, are tasked with. I think the hiring and in some cases firing of the staff leadership, the CEO is something that is going to be at the hands of the board of directors. And so, you need to be comfortable in that kind of a mindset if that kind of a role does present itself. But there are huge differences. And I would say the most fundamental difference is when you think about attracting resources. If you're on the board of directors of Ford or Apple or any publicly held corporation, one thing, you're being compensated highly as a board member in a for-profit situation. You're not being compensated in the non-for-profit sector. That's a volunteer role when you show up as a board member for a nonprofit. But the big thing is you're helping to attract the resources in a nonprofit organization. That's a huge part of the responsibility, is helping to bring in resources. Financially, you're asked to support the organization yourself. You might have what's called a give-get target, which means, let's say it's $10,000. Dan, you're on the board of XYZ nonprofit organization. You could write the check for $10,000. You might write a check for $500 and be expected to sort of raise the other $9,500 amongst your community. There's a financial target or financial goal for each board member in many nonprofit organizations. And that kind of responsibility isn't really part of the for-profit board experience. And so I think that that's one of the ways that there's a clear separation, is bringing in the resources to make sure the organization can achieve its desired effect.
Do people who join nonprofits understand this, or is it sort of something? I mean, do people know what they're getting into when they get into a nonprofit? Is that a
Sure. They may or they may not. But one of the things my book instructs, and one of the things that I coach, is the notion of having clear roles and responsibilities. And when somebody is being vetted for and considered for a board position, that you share those responsibilities with them and you have a conversation where you go through those line by line to make sure they understand what's going to be asked of them, and to make sure that they understand it and that they're comfortable with it. This may not be for everybody. Maybe they've never fundraised before and they're not comfortable asking other people for money. Okay, well, you could write the check yourself. Or if you're not comfortable fundraising in a meaningful way, then maybe being part of the board is not for you if that's what's being asked of everyone else, because there's a certain expectation across the board that certain things are going to happen, and you as a board member are going to meet or exceed that standard. So I think where there's a misalignment is because organizations have not done a good job up front of saying, this is what board service looks like for our organization. And so if somebody gets in and doesn't fully understand that, I think that's really on the organization, not on the individual, and it's easily solvable.
that's a good point. I think it's always good. It's never good to have surprises and not know what you're getting into. As we think about this, and you're working in nonprofits, it seems to me there's a really important thing, in a public organization, in a for-profit organization, is measuring how well you do, right? I mean, there are established ways and metrics for-profit organizations to measure what you do. I think for some nonprofits, there are kind of easy ways you can think of to measure the impacts you have. I think some of them, like the one you did with baseball and softball, might be a little bit harder to figure out how to do that. In my experience, once you start measuring something, kind of a fundamental characteristic of human behavior, you start measuring it and it starts getting better. So you really need to figure out how you're going to measure the impact and how you're going to be doing in your mission. And there are some kind of, I read your book, there's some antiquated measurements that people have for nonprofits. If you have really low administrative costs and that used to be really good. Now it may mean that you can't raise money to do what your real mission is. So can you talk a little bit about the metrics and how you might do it in different kinds of nonprofits?
Sure. I think this is a sort of a fundamental topic. Measurement and evaluation at its very core is, how can we demonstrate that our organization is having the impact it desires? And that's going to be very different for every organization. So there's roughly 1.8 million nonprofits in the United States. They each have a mission. And in some level, they each have what's called a theory of change. That if somebody who goes through our program started here and they go through our programming, then somehow they're going to be better off, however we define better off. Let's imagine in the simplest terms, it's a literacy program. So you would measure how students are reading, let's say at whatever grade level before, then you have your intervention, your program, and then you're going to measure them with the same device afterwards. Then you could say they're improved in this way. That's an outcome but it's not a long-term impact. The long-term impact is really, do those kids go on to college at a higher rate, and are those people more successful as a result of that? So measurement and evaluation isn't just how many meals you served, or how many people that are unhoused were able to be put into shelters, or this, that, and the other thing. It's, what is the long-term effect that our organization's having on the community we're trying to serve? And there's no set way to determine what the appropriate level of measurement is. So the good news is each organization can design an approach that makes sense for them. And I think that is our responsibility, is to do that. We have to be able to, with more than anecdotes and testimonials, tell people that our organization's really having positive effect. And then we know that because, and we measured in this way, and there's got to be logic behind it. There's got to be consistency behind it. And I think we can hold ourselves to that standard. And I think the organizations that do are the ones that are going to attract the most resources, and the ones that don't are going to find that they are less successful when they're applying for grants or trying to attract the attention of major donors. So in a very selfish way, it's critical for us to kind of solve this problem, because if we're able to solve it, then the resources should follow, because we're going to have a much stronger story for why our organization should exist, and that it's having the kind of change in the community we were hoping for.
I think this is really on target. It reminds me of a company that I worked for, and it shows you're sort of looking at the same as a corporation. And this guy that I was talking to said, we've gotten fairly good at managing big projects so that they're on time and within budget. What we really need to do is to figure out whether they deliver the long-term results that we're looking for. And I think what you've said is the same thing. You don't want to just measure the kind of easy things to measure. You want to measure the things that look at the long-term impact. I think that's a good way of thinking about what you're doing, and making your mission succeed and have a long-term impact on the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time organizations will put their time and effort on what's called their programs. What is the thing that we're doing in the community, and however we need to show up for the population we're trying to serve? And our attention goes there, and then maybe we're trying to expand it to another community, or do this or do that. But, being able to be disciplined enough to measure whether the projects are having a desired impact, or your programs are having the desired impact, it's not necessarily the kind of fun, sexy work that we thought we were getting into, but in the long term, if your organization is going to be sustainable and is going to grow and have a bigger impact 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you're going to need a measurement and evaluation program that really tells an objective story, or a more objective story, and to just trust us, we know what we're doing, or trust us, our programs are great, or here's this video of people smiling and happy. Like, no, you need data, you need proof that the organization's making a difference.
Thank you very much. I've learned a lot. I think there's always a lot more to learn. I think we have a lot of people within our organization, and people watching the video, that may want to talk to you about the topic. And I think we can recommend your book. I certainly enjoyed it as well. Thank you for your time. And once again, thanks for being a part of 11 Canterbury.
And my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.